Ever notice how, like, two people can see the same thing, the same event, and come away with totally different stories about what
Yeah, yeah,
happened?
totally.
It's like that optical illusion, the classic one, young woman, old woman. Our brains just see what they want to see sometimes, right?
Absolutely. Our experiences, our biases, they all color how we interpret the world. That's what makes social psych so fascinating, you know?
Totally. And that's what we're diving into today. This Unit 3.PDS looks like a chapter from a textbook, Social Psych, all about how researchers actually, like, study human behavior.
The methods. It's about going beyond those gut feelings and getting at the why behind how people act.
Right. Because we think it's just common sense, but
Oh, common sense will trip you up faster than you can blink. Take that old idea, heavier objects fall faster. People swore that was true for like centuries. Seemed logical.
makes sense. Heavier things got to draw quicker, right?
Exactly. Then Galileo comes along, does his experiments, boom. Whole new understanding of gravity. Social psych, it's kind of like that, always challenging those assumptions.
Love that. And I'll admit there have been times I thought I had something figured out based on, like, my own experience and, oops, totally wrong.
Happens to the best of us.
So how do social psychologists avoid that trap, the "I just know this is true" trap? How do they make it, like, really scientific?
It's all about being systematic. Think of it like imagine a detective at a crime scene, yeah.
Okay, got it.
They don't just glance around, they're methodical, dusting for fingerprints, analyzing footprints, they have a plan, what to look for, how to document it all.
So it's not random. They're not just winging it.
No way. Social psychologists do the same. They'll define exactly what they're studying, say, aggression.
Yeah.
Then they figure out how to observe and measure it. Maybe it's counting how many times someone interrupts during a conversation.
So if you don't know what you're looking for in the first place,
Exactly. Garbage in, garbage out, right.
100%.
But once you have good observations, that's when you connect the dots. Start looking for patterns, something bigger than just one person's behavior. That's where theories come in. Yeah, like imagine that detective's evidence board, they're linking clues to explain not just what happened, but why.
So instead of just saying, this person seems anxious, you might have a theory that, like, exposure to social media is linked to anxiety because of, I don't know, comparisons people make or
There
whatever.
you go. And here's the important part. A good theory, it should be able to predict what'll happen in new situations. Just like a good recipe should work, whether you're using a gas stove or electric.
Gotta love a good recipe.
Right. So social psychologists put their theories to the test, see if they hold up in the real world.
Okay, now this is what gets me. How do you test something as complex as, like, human behavior? People are full of surprises, you
Yeah.
know? How do you make sure you're not just seeing what you want to see?
Well, there are a few key approaches. First up, observation. Literally watching how people behave.
Okay, so, like, people watching, but
Not just casual, no, no. Researchers go in with a purpose. Maybe they're studying, I don't know, how couples communicate in restaurants. They'd observe things like eye contact, tone of voice, who orders the wine, all that.
like one of those reality TV shows where they analyze every little glance and sigh.
Huh, kind of. But for science.
Right. Right, of course, for science. But even with all that observation, you're just getting a snapshot, right? How do you go from there to, like, is this thing actually related to that thing?
That's where correlation comes in. It's all about looking for patterns. Do certain things tend to go together? Like, is there a connection between time spent on social media and how lonely people say they feel?
Okay, so you gather all that data and then see if those two things, they kind of move together. But, and maybe this is dumb, but you can't just say one causes the other, can you?
You're thinking like a social psychologist already.
Yeah.
Because you're right, correlation doesn't mean causation. Just because two things are related, like ice cream sales and crime rates both go up in the summer.
Doesn't mean one's causing the other. Maybe it's just hot, everyone's grumpy.
Exactly. It could be other things at play. That's why you often see social psychologists turning to experiments.
Because experiments, they're like the gold standard, right? Figuring out cause and effect. It's like, instead of just watching people eat ice cream, you actually, control how much they get.
Precisely. You'd create different groups. Maybe one gets unlimited ice cream, the other none at all. Then you see if it affects their behavior.
And you make sure everything else is the same, right? Like, they're getting the same amount of sunshine, because maybe sunshine makes people more or less.
Aggressive, exactly. By controlling those other factors, you can isolate the impact of your variable, the thing you manipulated in this case, the ice cream.
So experiments, they're great. But what about, like, real life, where everything's messier? You can't control all the variables.
That's where we got to get out of the lab, right? That's where ethnography comes in.
Ethnography? Okay, that sounds intense.
It can be. Think of it like Like those nature documentaries, yeah. Instead of just studying animals at the zoo, they're out in the jungle really getting into their world.
Getting up close and personal.
Exactly. So instead of, say, studying prejudice by showing people pictures in a lab, an ethnographer might actually spend time in a community, maybe where there's tension between groups, to see how those prejudices play out in real life.
Wow, so they're not just observing, they're like immersing themselves.
100%.
Yeah.
They call it participant observation. An ethnographer might live in a community for months, even years, going to events, building relationships, really getting to know people.
It's like more than walk a mile in their shoes. It's like running a marathon in their shoes.
Huh. That's a good one. And it's through that deep dive that you start to uncover those unspoken rules, the cultural norms that really drive behavior.
Like stuff people don't even realize they're doing.
Exactly. Imagine an ethnographer studying a neighborhood. They're watching how people greet each other, who sits with who at, I don't know, a community picnic. Those little cues tell you a lot.
Like they're cracking code, those hidden rules everyone seems to know but no one talks about.
Huh.
But with all that, being so close to it, doesn't that mess with the results? How do they make sure their own biases aren't like skewing things?
It's a balancing act for sure. Ethnographers are trained to constantly be checking themselves, questioning their assumptions, acknowledging their blind spots.
Blind spots, yeah, like we all have them.
Totally. And they keep super detailed notes, not just about what they observe, but also their own thoughts, their feelings about what they're seeing.
So it's about being really upfront. Like,
Yeah.
hey, I'm part of this whole equation, not some objective robot.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so valuable. Ethnography gives you this rich picture of human behavior that you just can't get from, like, a lab experiment alone.
It's like reading a travel brochure versus actually
Yeah.
going to a place, right? One gives you the highlights, the other.
The real deal.
Huh, exactly. Speaking of a lot of information, though, with all these different studies happening, how do we make sense of it all? It's overwhelming.
That is a great point. And that's where meta-analysis swoops in to save the day. You know how people say, like, one study doesn't prove anything?
Yeah, I've heard that.
Well, meta-analysis takes that to heart.
So instead of just one study about, say, video games, and if they make people aggressive, a meta-analysis would look at a ton of studies on the same thing.
You got it. Dozens, maybe even hundreds of studies on the same topic.
Wow, talk about information overload. So they gather all that data, and then...
It's all about the statistics. By crunching those numbers, they can start to see the bigger picture, the patterns, the trends that hold up across all those different studies.
So it's like taking a puzzle, 1,000 pieces, maybe more, and finally seeing the image come together.
Yeah.
But how do they decide which studies to use in the first place? Couldn't you just, cherry pick the ones you agree with?
That is a super important point, and it's why transparency is key. Researchers, they have to be crystal clear about their criteria, the rules for which studies make the cut.
Okay, so if you were doing a meta-analysis on, social media and depression in teens, you'd have to define exactly what you mean by social media, by depression, by teens.
100%. And what kinds of studies they're using, maybe only experiments, maybe a mix, how many people were in each study, all those details matter.
So it's like a legal case, right?
Yeah,
You need the evidence, but you also got to show your work, how you got there.
love that analogy. And even with all that rigor, meta-analysis has its limitations.
Oh, there are always limitations, right? Nothing's perfect.
True. One big one is what's called publication bias.
Publication bias. Okay, now I know I've never heard of that one. What is that?
So think about it. A researcher does a study, right? And they get these amazing, groundbreaking results. That study's probably going to get published. Everyone wants to read it.
Makes sense. Exciting new findings.
But what if a researcher does a study and, well, nothing much happens? Not as exciting, right?
Yeah, we studied this thing and it did. Basically nothing. Not exactly headline news.
Right. And unfortunately, those less exciting studies, they might be less likely to get published, which is a problem.
Because then it looks like all the research says this one thing when really it's more complicated than that.
Exactly. That's how publication bias can creep in, and it can really mess with the results of a meta-analysis.
It's like absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, right? Just because we haven't found something doesn't mean it's not out there.
Preach. And that's why researchers doing these big meta-analyses, they try to cast a wide net, looking for published and unpublished studies to get the most accurate picture.
So they're not just looking at the shiniest apples at the top of the barrel. They're digging through the whole thing.
Exactly. Gonna make sure you're not missing those hidden gems. systems, right? Speaking of getting the whole picture.
It's like we've got this whole toolbox now, right?
Yeah.
All these different ways to understand how people tick. You've got observation, correlation, experiments, even ethnography out there in the wild.
Love that, the social psych toolbox.
So how do you know which tool is the right one?
Well, it's kind of like being a chef, right? You wouldn't use a meat cleaver to, like, slice a tomato. You need the right tool for the job.
Okay, so let's say you're studying, I don't know, how being tired messes with your decisions, sleep deprivation, all that. What tool are you grabbing?
Perfect example. For that, you'd probably go with an experiment. You can control how much sleep people get, divide them into groups.
One group gets to sleep all night, the other no sleep at all. Then you test them in the morning and see how well they make decisions.
Exactly. And you want to make sure everything else is the same, right? So it's
Yeah.
really just the sleep deprivation that's affecting them, not like how much coffee they had or whatever.
Right, controlling for those other variables.
Yeah.
But what if you wanted to see how that works in, like, the real world, not just the lab? Like, how do doctors in the ER make decisions when they've been working all night?
Now we're getting complex. An experiment can't really capture all of that.
Way too many things happening. The pressure, the exhaustion, it's life or death.
Exactly. That's where something like ethnography would be amazing. You could have a researcher shadowing those ER doctors, seeing how they interact, how they make decisions under pressure, how it changes depending on how much sleep they've had.
So the experiment gives you that clear cause and effect. But ethnography is like, here's the messy human reality of it all.
And sometimes researchers even combine methods. Start with observation, notice a pattern, then maybe use some correlation to see if the numbers back it up, then boom, design an experiment to really test it.
Using all the tools in the toolbox. I love it. This has been such a cool deep dive. It's amazing how much work goes into figuring out why we do the things we do.
It never ends, right? Always more to discover. But the more we understand about how we know these things, the better we are at, like, evaluating information in general.
It's like we've got this BS detector now. We can spot those clickbait headlines, those overly simplistic explanations, and be like, hold on, what's the evidence here?
Exactly. Question those assumptions. Be curious. That's what makes us smarter, more engaged.
So next time you're scrolling through social media or reading an article or even just like people watching,
Always people watching.
right? Remember what we talked about today. Ask those questions, be curious, see if you can use your social psych powers for good.
Love it. And tell us what you find. We're always up for more deep dives.
Until next time, keep those minds curious and remember.
The deep dive never ends.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Your support helps us keep creating valuable content like this. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. Join our community for more insights into psychology and personal development. Let's grow and learn together. See you in the next